Hello there and welcome. This is Mikhail or Michael speaking. First of all, I want to say thank you all who decided to support me financially on Patreon. Now, we will start with Bakhmut and as always work ourselves around the entire front line. Well, first of all, the only change that had appeared technically is situation here. Russians were able to take full control over the industrial school located here, thus reaching Tchaikovskого Street here. Now, if we zoom out, we can see how long this street is. Just a few days ago, Russians were not controlling that much of the street, but in the last 48 hours, they had captured a lot of ground. As a result of that, gaining more control over the entire street. Here, actually, some salients or pockets had developed. So this is the first one. And this is the second smaller one right here. With that in mind, Russians are attacking in these directions in attempt to close those pockets. So fighting continues within this residential area and the remaining part of the old military base or garage area. Now, the Russians have been very active here in Bakhmut in the last week, gaining a lot of land. There is another thing I want to show you and talked about that is a possible precursor to the Ukrainians leaving the Samolyot district altogether, this one right here. If you remember, Russians and Ukrainians were battling out for the control over the Tchaikovskого Street in this district for a month now, with, of course, Russians and Ukrainians launching occasional successful attacks and counterattacks. So overall, this sector right here has been changing hands for a long time. So basically this video shows a explosion, a controlled demolition of this building. Ukrainians had blown up this building for the reasons I will talk in a minute, but first I will show you the video I'm talking about. This building is located right in front of a Ukrainian position. This is how these buildings look originally. So as you can see by the paintings on their side, this is the buildings in question. Now, looking at this picture, I see a tragedy unfolding. I see a very dark and sad symbolism. As you can see, both these paintings depict a family of four. So a father, a son, and a mother and a daughter. And as a result of that explosion, this building is demolished with mother and daughter out of the picture. And again, this is just very sad. Now, the reasons why Ukrainians blew up this building right here, I believe it implies that Ukrainians are leaving this sector altogether as they are unable to defend it anymore. As you can see, this set of buildings form a sort of a square formation, I would say a fortress, providing great defensive positions for whoever is in this place. So Ukrainians are willing to give up this sector for the Russians, but they are trying to make sure that Russians will not use these buildings as a defensive position. Again, these high-rise buildings overlook the Tchaikovskого Street as well as this entire sector right here. So by blowing up this building, Ukrainians are giving Russians less possibilities and advantages when they will eventually capture this sector. We will stay in Bakhmut for some time as well, as I want to cover an interesting point that I've realized. As you know, Russians are attacking here along these streets, but did not achieve any major success here. Russians had conducted limited ground attacks towards Khramovo, and here is what I realized recently. If Russians were to continue to advance, right, if as a result of clashes Russians will be able to take, let's say, this part of the city in a day or two, then again advance even further, let's say in 5 more days capture this territory, and then advance even further, they would basically kill 3 birds with 1 stone. They would physically cut off this road right here, thus making capture of Khramovo irrelevant. They would physically cut off this road right here, and will establish visual and fire control over this road right here. And if you look closely, you would understand that with that happening, Ukrainians will not have any more actual roads of any kind that leads to Bakhmut. Of course, this situation here is not probable, but not impossible. And I believe this is the best way to end Battle of Bakhmut without wasting extra lives of Russian peoples, because Ukrainians can hold out for long in this sector, thus contributing to a high amount of lives lost. So I guess we will see how this battle is unfolding, it is now clear that we are entering the last stage of the Battle of Bakhmut, and its fate is within Ukrainian forces and the way they will address the entire situation. Now, fighting continues here along the 00506 road, as Russians and Ukrainians are clashing within its proximity in order to gain control over it. Russians had launched limited ground assaults towards Avdiivka and Grigorivka, as well as towards Orikhovo-Vasilivka and the Lahan E40 highway. Then we go to the Siversk front. Here Russians had conducted limited military operations towards Spirne and Verkhnekamiansk. Situation in Belogorivka remains the same, as both Ukrainians and Russians had entered a stage of another defensive style warfare. Here fighting in Serbiansky forest continues as Russians continue to attempt to reach Grigorivka, as well as gain foothold here in this forested area. The entire Kreminna front has not seen any changes. Both Russians and Ukrainians are extremely cautious about all this situation. Small recon groups are fighting here in the middle of these fields, with Russians and Ukrainians engaged in artillery duels. Then we go to Avdiivka. Situation in Avdiivka here as follows. Village of Kamianka is still under the Ukrainian control. Russians continue to spread their zone of control here around Krasnogorivka, capturing and gaining more and more control over this rail line. Some Ukrainian sources are claiming that as a result of a successful Ukrainian counterattack, they were able to capture some land here in this area around Alexandropol. However, official pro-Ukrainian sources are not stating anything of that manner, so let the time be our judge, and we will see whether that was true or not in few days. Russians had conducted limited operations here in Apitne and Vadyane. Situation in Pervomaisky remains the same, as well as Nevelsky. Then we have Marinka, where Russians are unsuccessfully attacking from the north and to the south. However, some minor success is reported within the center of the city. Situation in Novomikhailivka remains the same, as well as in Vuglidar. No changes here. Before the video ends, I want to briefly touch on the situation here in Zaporozhye. First of all, more reports are coming in of a possible Ukrainian counteroffensive to be taken here. Russians are heavily entrenching and building defensive lines here along the entire front line and evacuating civilians from settlements in the close proximity of the front line. Overall, there are a lot of artillery barrages here around this entire area. Russians and Ukrainians are engaged in drone hunting in attempt to disrupt and paralyze each other's logistics. But I must say that Russian army in 2020 is not a Russian army in 2023. It's different armies. At this point, Russian army is bigger, more equipped, and battle-hardened. I assume Ukrainians will just throw themselves against a wall, and if that counteroffensive would fail, Russians would soon launch counteroffensive, and perhaps the whole Zaporozhye front might cripple for Ukrainian forces. So this is the end of the video. I hope you liked it. If you did, please consider supporting it with a like, comment, and a subscription. Don't forget to ring that notification bell, as it will inform you of my videos being posted immediately. If you feel extra generous, please consider supporting me on Patreon, as it will move me closer to my goal of working on YouTube full-time. Thank you in advance. As always, humanity calls me to condemn all violence against human beings. Have a good day, and always remember, Russia will be free.